Once upon a time, in a distant kingdom, there was a young king named David. He had just inherited the throne at the age of 25 after the passing of his father. As a boy, David had been guided by a wise teacher named Edward, who not only taught him about the world, but also instilled in him the values of kindness, patience, and wisdom. After his father's death, Edward became David's closest advisor and helped him navigate the challenges of ruling the kingdom. For many years, everything in the kingdom went smoothly until one day a sudden food crisis hit. The crisis was caused by a mistake Edward had made while forecasting the weather. In his frustration and anger, David made a rash decision and ordered that Edward J., his own mentor, be banished from the kingdom, never to return. With a heavy heart, Edward left the palace, leaving behind the life he had known to start anew elsewhere. Edward chose to settle in a small, distant village where he lived simply as a farmer. Despite having wealth, he embraced the humble life, connecting with the villagers and sharing in their everyday struggles. Over time, he earned their respect and trust, offering advice on everything from farming to resolving disputes. Back in the kingdom, David found himself struggling. He missed Edward's wise counsel, especially when faced with difficult decisions. Slowly, he began to regret his rash decision to banish Edward. Realizing the mistake he had made in acting out of anger rather than wisdom, David decided to send soldiers to search for Edward and bring him back. However, days turned into weeks, and the soldiers could not find Edward. The kingdom was vast, and no one seemed to know where he had gone. Then, David had an idea. Inspired by the clever methods Edward had once taught him, he decided to test if he could find Edward's wisdom within the kingdom. David ordered his soldiers to send a letter and a clay jar to the head of each village, asking the village leaders to return the jar filled with wisdom within a month. If they failed to do so, they would have to fill the jar with precious jewels instead. The jar and letter reached the village where Edward lived, and the village leader, confused by the strange request, went to Edward for advice. Edward calmly replied that wisdom could not be put into a jar. He knew the village didn't have enough jewels to fill it either, and the villagers were fearful of the consequences they might face for failing the king's strange challenge. Seeing their anxiety, Edward reassured them, "Hand me the jar. I'll make sure it's filled with wisdom by the end of the month." The village leader asked how he planned to do so, and Edward smiled, replying, "I'm not sure yet, but I'm certain that with time, a solution will come." The villagers, trusting in Edward's wisdom, left the jar with him. Edward sat quietly and pondered the problem. Suddenly, he noticed a small pumpkin vine growing nearby. An idea sparked in his mind. Gently, he placed a tiny pumpkin inside the jar, without cutting it off from the vine. Day by day, he watered it, and over time, the pumpkin grew larger, eventually filling the entire jar so that it could not be removed. When the pumpkin had fully grown, Edward carefully cut the vine and sent the jar back to the kingdom. When King David received the jar, he was amazed to find it filled with a large pumpkin. He smiled and said to himself, "Growing a pumpkin this large inside a jar is the work of a wise mind." Immediately, he realized that only Edward could have come up with such a clever solution. Without hesitation, David decided to set out to find Edward, apologize for his rash decision, and bring him back to the kingdom. This story teaches us an important lesson. Never make decisions in the heat of anger. Strong emotions can cloud your judgment and lead to regret. Instead, take a moment to calm yourself before making decisions. A peaceful mind leads to clearer thinking, helping you find the best path forward. Remember, wisdom often comes from patience and understanding.